Right. Well, here we are, everybody. For those of you listening live, those of you who are listening to the recording later, we've been fighting the technology, but we have won. We are victorious. Between Kathy's patience and my suggestions, we've figured it out. First of all, well, Kathy, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the invitation, Hayo.
Yeah, so everybody, we're just going to have a very informal conversation. For those of you who are listening live, you'll be able to ask us some questions or actually ask me questions later after we finish our conversation. But yeah, the purpose really is to have just essentially a chat about teacher leadership, and we'll get into what exactly we mean by teacher leadership in a moment. But yeah, it's such an important topic and one that Kathy has been working on, I suppose, in some way or other for, that's to be counted in decades, not years. Am I right, Kathy?
I will own that longevity of interest.
Longevity of interest. I like that. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about L2 grit. So you obviously have L2 leadership grit, because otherwise you wouldn't be around after all this time and still being so active in this field. Before we get into the conversation, for those of you listening, Kathy and I, we've sort of known each other for more than 10 years, I think, in some way or other through Anaheim University. We did a couple of residentials together in Anaheim. And then was it a couple of years ago that we started working together on the leadership article and the book? And
Mhm.
that's been a lot of fun. And we got so much so much inspiration from that and so many great contributions. We'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, but from people from all around the world and so many ideas and so many exciting projects that people are involved in and so on, that we really thought, well, now that the book is out there, what can we do next? Because there's so much more to do. And then we did a special issue of what's the name of the journal again, Kathy?
Second language teacher education.
Yes, is it Studies in Second Language Teacher Education? I think it
No,
is,
you're
right?
thinking of studies in second language acquisition. This one is just SLTE, second language teacher education,
You see, this is why I need you here, Kathy. You keep me on the straight and narrow. I can't even remember
which is
where
more
we
than a
published
full
it.
time job with you.
Oh, this is being recorded. Be careful, all right?
Okay.
Um, but no, that's yes. So that was also a lot of fun. We did the Colville papers. Was that about 18 months ago? I would say, Kathy. Is that
Mhm.
about right?
Yep.
Yeah, and we got a lot of interest, a lot of contributions, and of course we were only able to select at the end. Was it 10, 11 articles, something along those
Mhm.
lines? And the special issue came out. Was it 3 months ago or something like that, or a bit longer?
Just about, yeah, just about half a year ago.
Half a year ago, yeah. And we talked about doing some sort of a launch event, and we never got to it. But then we thought, well, why don't we just chat about it and about teacher leadership? And so that's what we're going to do now. And now that we've given everybody a little bit of time to hopefully join us, for those of you who want to be with us live, welcome to everybody. If you are listening live and you want to just put into the chat where you are listening in from, please do. And for those of you who are watching the recording later, welcome as well, of course. So let's get into the actual topic itself. And I think, you and I talked last week about how to kind of shape the conversation. And I think we agreed it will be a really good starting point to just really take a step back and just discuss what actually it is that we mean by, and what is generally speaking in the literature meant by language teacher leadership. Can you speak a little bit to that, Kathy?
Yeah. And let me start by saying what I think it's not. People tend to associate leadership with what I consider to be, and is sometimes called in the literature, positional leadership. That is, you're a leader by virtue of having a particular position that has a label on it that shows you have leadership responsibilities. So you're a principal or a dean or a lead teacher or a supervisor. You have some sort of official role. Perhaps if we're talking about the professional associations, you're an executive director or you're elected president of a teacher's organization or something like that, that your leadership is associated with the position. I think the concept of teacher leadership is much more fluid, much freer than that. A teacher can be a leader by virtue of his or her actions, stance, attitude, and not necessarily because of a particular position held, other than the role of teacher. I mean, on some level, all of us teachers are leaders in our own classrooms. We're leading our students. But teacher leadership has also come to mean the kinds of things that teachers do to influence programs, to further objectives, to build and support a team. And it doesn't necessarily have to be attached to an official label. So I'm saying teacher leadership maybe, but it's not necessarily positional leadership. Certainly teachers can take on important positions, but teacher leadership is not cemented to or necessarily connected to that kind of role. Would you agree with that, or is there more that I've left out?
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know if you've had the same experience, but in my own teaching and working with language teachers from different countries around the world, you start off by saying what it's not, but I think a lot of teachers still have that idea of what you just said, like it has to be related to some sort of a formal role and a position, as you say, and something that is recognizable. That person is the principal, that person is the head of the department or whatever. But what you're describing, I wanted to actually ask you a follow-up question. You mentioned three things. You said it's an action, a stance, or an attitude. So action is pretty obvious, it's things that we do, but what do you mean by stance and attitude, and are they different?
I think they're a little bit different. For me, attitude is a way of being, a way of thinking. It's our positive or negative response to situations. For me, stance, and it's curious that I said that. I hadn't thought about that word. It just sort of popped out. Stance means, for me, like taking a position. And I think one of the important things we do as teacher leaders is take positions on certain issues. Our attitude about those issues may range from extremely positive to quite negative, but we have to take a position in order to move forward in the action component about the issues that we're facing as leaders. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, actually, it does, and it's a fascinating distinction that you obviously unconsciously, or I should say subconsciously, proffered, which is that this distinction between, well, what you just said is having clarity of purpose, like, a stance as in knowing who you are, knowing what your values are, knowing where you want to go and perhaps where you want to bring your colleagues to, which is a very interesting, multifaceted concept, isn't it?
Yeah, that works for me. What you just said makes good sense.
Yeah. And we're getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think that's fine. The one of the things that I found from some of my own research and some of my PhD students' research is that when we ask teachers what types of leadership they appreciate, what type of leadership works for them, not being leaders, but being led, shall we say, one of the things that often comes up is that the leader has to provide clarity. It's one of the skills that I think, well, that I've observed a lot of teachers saying they appreciate. And that clarity comes from having a strong stance, a strong position of, who you are, what you stand for, almost literally, right? So stance is in standing for something. What do you think of
Exactly.
that?
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's nice. I like that. I like that tripartite distinction that we just came up with here on the fly. It's amazing. That's another article, almost written already. Great. So just a follow-up question on what you said, what it's not and what it is. So would you agree then that language teacher leadership is not at least not necessarily the same as management.
Oh, absolutely. I think leadership, good leadership must entail certain managerial skills and certain body of managerial knowledge, but not all managers are leaders and not all leaders are managers. Or at least
Yeah,
maybe I should insert some adjectives. Not all managers are good leaders and not
right.
all leaders are good managers. How's that for clarification?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Was it Peter Drucker, the famous quote, like, managers do things right and leaders do the right thing?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, and you need both, right? Because it's one thing to say, to have a vision of where you want to take, for example, a team of people, and that's
Mhm.
great, that's necessary, but it's not enough, is it? You also need to be able to implement it and guide people and give them feedback. And so perhaps it's more useful than for listeners to not necessarily think of them as a dichotomy per se, but as I think for most teachers, and keen to hear what you think of this, but I think for most teachers, language teachers at least, we are more naturally drawn to the leadership attributes that we've just talked about rather than the managerial skills.
Mhm.
But I think if we see them as being in service of each other, I think then perhaps the whole idea of stepping up and taking on leadership roles might become more attractive to teachers.
Yeah. And for me, it's almost like a Venn diagram, overlapping circles. And as a person who's not in the leadership role, as someone who's being led in a sense, I prefer to work with a leader who's got strong managerial skills. But unless there's a strong managerial team taking care of that stuff, okay. But I really don't like working with managers who don't have leadership skills. That to me is a terrible gap. That's not the person I
Yeah,
want to work with it for.
yeah. Yeah, you can almost forgive somebody for perhaps lacking some of the technical skills, the managerial skills, but it's almost impossible, especially long term, to work with someone who doesn't have the leadership skills, right?
Mhm. But
Yeah.
Hayo, actually, when we started talking about doing this podcast, you got me thinking about this more and more. And I believe, and I don't think you'll just disagree with me, that good teachers already have and may not recognize that they have a number of leadership skills that we use naturally in our teaching. And I made a list. I'd like to share my list with you and our listeners,
Please.
if that's okay. Is that all right?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Okay. So these are 10 things that I think teachers do regularly that are, I might even say, essential leadership skills. I don't know if there's the research to back me up on that, but I think they're really important. So if we just think about ourselves as teachers, okay, on a regular basis, we plan and we prepare. We also, in working with our students, we have to be motivating and, if we're really on our game, inspiring, especially if we're working with a subject matter that the students find challenging or not fully interesting, right? We have to follow up on whatever it is we've been working on. We have to follow up and we give feedback. That's something teachers do all the time. It's second nature, it's part of our work, whether it's actually correcting errors in pronunciation or giving students praise for how they've improved their essay writing. We give feedback, right? Um, I think another important thing that we do, maybe perhaps especially in a kind of a task-based teaching mode, is focusing the students on particular tasks or projects. There's a kind of an intentional helping the students get focused on what needs to be done. Time management is a huge part of what teachers have to do, whether it's in just getting through the lesson for the day or deciding I'm not going to get through the lesson plan for the day and deciding what it is I'm going to pick up another time, what it is I'm going to delete. Time management is huge for teachers, right? And then, and this is sort of like perhaps after a lesson, rethinking, revising, and replanning what to do. And understand that it's almost the same as planning and preparing, but I think looking back and having to replan is another step, another kind of challenge. Okay. Then maybe this is like focusing the students, but helping the students actually meet goals. To be able to cross that objective off the list, because you know the students have learned that getting them focused and motivated and excited and working to the point where they meet the goals is something that good teachers can do, right? And then I'm down to number 9 now. I think this is important, perhaps in different ways, in different contexts. But let me think about a teacher working in a young learner situation, say kindergarten through secondary school graduation, right? Think of all the stakeholders that teachers have to interact with and communicate with, not just the students, not just colleagues, not just your principal, the parents, the school board, the testing agencies that come in. There are so many stakeholders involved in teaching that we have to be able to communicate with. And then finally, maybe I added this one just because I wanted a nice round 10, but to me, it seems like an important thing for us to do as teachers, especially when the job is frustrating, right? I think something good teachers do is to take satisfaction from a job well done, to
That's
recognize
nice.
accomplishments, whether they're our students or ours and our students, to take satisfaction in a job well done. And I challenge you, Hayo, to tell me if any of these things are not important to leadership.
Yeah,
Don't you think they
exactly.
are?
Yeah, absolutely,
I saw you
100%.
taking
Yeah,
notes like a very good colleague, a very good student. You're taking notes
very
there.
good
And
student.
I
Yes, yes.
really
I'm
believe
aiming
these
for that
things.
gold star.
There you go. These are things that teachers do, maybe not brilliantly every single day. Somebody told me one time that even excellent teachers have average days. I don't know whose quote that is, but I think it's a good one to remember. But honestly, I think these are things that teachers do, teachers know how to do, and they are so valuable as leadership characteristics, leadership traits.
I would go almost one step further, which is that these are examples, and there might be others, but these are certainly examples of necessary skills. Like without these, it would be if you can't if you can't plan properly, if you can't give people feedback, if you can't give people focus and direction, if you can't recognize achievements, all the things that you mentioned, it's almost impossible to think of being a successful leader of any sort. So these are necessary skills that by definition as teachers most of us already have. It may not be, there may be others that we need to develop in addition to these, but this core set is already ingrained in our daily practice. Yeah, I like that very much. Yeah,
I don't
I'll
think
write
any
them
of
down later.
these, yeah, I'll tell you what, Haya, going back to the earlier point you were making about managerial skills and leadership skills, these are more on the leadership side of the circle in the Venn diagram. This is not balancing a budget. This is not marketing your program. Okay, this is the more human relations, working with people stuff that leadership necessarily demands, I
Yeah,
think.
no, I absolutely agree, and that's such a positive way of looking at it because, I mean, it's nice to know as as anyone, it's nice to know that there are things that you already know, that you already do, that you already possess, skills that you already possess, that you may not have recognized as being able to be put to use outside of your everyday context. Because that's what it is, isn't it? With these skills, you can, like you mentioned, stakeholder engagement, for example. Like being able to work with different communities, parents, different groups, organizations. You have the capacity already to step out as far as you want from your classroom, as you can
Yeah,
handle and as you desire. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So these are fundamental skills, prerequisites almost. Now, how would teachers, if they were thinking about perhaps taking more conscious steps towards developing these types of leadership skills, shall we say, right? What are some of the pathways that teachers can walk to do that?
Okay. Um, I'm happy to have you bring that up because, as you know, that's one of my favorite themes. And as Hayo knows, my colleague Caleb Powers and I did some research on how teacher leaders, in fact, leaders in foreign language education in the United States, people who've held very important positional leadership roles, is how we reach them. How did they get to be leaders? And the data are fascinating. Um, I actually have some data to share with you, but I'll just respond in general to the question first. I think truly having confidence, maybe even having faith in yourself and that your ideas are worthwhile, and speaking up in faculty meetings, um, not being afraid to share ideas when there's a brainstorming session going on, being confident in your own worth, I think is a really important first place to start from, right? And so many of the teachers, we had over 200 respondents to a survey, and so many of them said that they got started realizing that they had the capacity for leadership by volunteering. And sometimes this would be volunteering in their religious organizations, sometimes in sports, sometimes in theater, sometimes in music, but often within the context of the school. So agreeing to be the committee chair for whatever events coming up, or agreeing to serve as a liaison to a parents group for children that are struggling. The sort of things that we almost dread to take on because they're time consuming, because they're involving dealing with problems, right? But volunteering, honestly, I look back at the opportunities I had to volunteer as a young teacher, the ones I missed, the ones I took. I met so many wonderful people. The contacts that came out of volunteering really. So I think volunteering is very important. And then another thing that comes up a lot in the data, Hayo, is that teachers would be in a group, and someone in that group, when there was a call for who's willing to take this on, someone in that group would say, well, I've been listening to Hayo and I think he's got good ideas. I'd like to see him chair this committee. So being volunteered, being nominated is another way in. And you may sit up straight and go, who, me? And when I think about this issue, it reminds me of that scene in the first Harry Potter film where they're off on the island and Hagrid comes barging in, breaks down the door with the birthday cake for Harry's 11th birthday, and tells Harry, you're a wizard. And Harry says, me? No, I can't be a wizard. And I feel like that's what teachers sometimes say. No, I couldn't, I couldn't be the lead teacher for this level, or I couldn't offer these ideas in a conference presentation. This was just my term paper report. I just feel like so many times getting past the lack of confidence is a huge step. Is that
Yeah,
too
I really
too
no,
much,
it's
too preachy?
no, I think it's great, but I mean that I mean look, at the end of the day, we're all emotional beings, and I think I certainly know from myself, but also see from my students or people earlier in their career. There's a lot of dread, sometimes even genuine anxiety about, what if I step up and what if I can't do it? What if I fail? What if people think that my idea is not, good in a meeting or something? And what you're saying is, well, have that faith in yourself. And it goes directly back, I feel, maybe you feel differently, to that idea of having a clear stance, because you might not yet have the same, 20 or 30 years of experience that maybe a colleague has. So you might think, well, I've only been here for 2 years, so what do I have to offer compared to somebody who's been here for 32 years? But you do, if what you are aiming for, what your values are, what you're trying to achieve, what you care about, what you're trying to improve for your learners, their parents, the community, whatever, that's your
Mhm.
stance. And if you speak from that, you can't really go wrong, can you?
Yeah, I think that's the starting point. That belief, that belief.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I
And then,
share
of
some
course, you
other
mentioned,
data?
go ahead. Yeah, please. Yes,
I
yes.
I had one other thing that I wanted to along this theme that I wanted to share, and this is from a chapter in your beautiful book, the one with the ladder and the cloud on the front. I love that cover.
Thanks for the plug.
So
Well, I'll give you
yeah,
5% of the royalties. Yeah, yeah.
okay, good. So it's in the same study that Caleb and I did, we asked people, when did you first become aware that you had leadership potential? I mean, what was that aha moment where somebody said, I think Hayo would be really good in that role? And you go, what? Who, me? So here's what we found out. Only almost 20% had that kind of awareness when they were still in school, going through up through high school, right? Just 20% became aware of their leadership potential when they were in their bachelor's studies and their graduate studies, so sometimes in higher education, right? But for an entire 25%, a fourth of the people that responded to us, and these are vastly experienced people who have held positional leadership roles, right? 25% of them never became aware of their potential as leaders until they were well established in their careers. I'm not talking about early careers when you finish university
Mhm.
and get into your teaching position. I'm talking about well established in their teaching careers. And why is it a fourth of these experienced people just didn't know that they could be leaders or weren't aware that they had that potential? And to me, that seems like we're probably not encouraging teachers enough to look at the strengths they've already got,
Yeah.
including
No, I would.
pre-service teachers.
Yeah, yeah, exact. Pre-service, in-service, at all levels, right? Because one of the things that we were going to talk about is obstacles. You've already identified one, which is the obstacles that we place in our own path. Not having the confidence. It reminded me earlier of a quote. Was it? I forget the name of the cartoonist, Ellie something. She has this wonderful cartoon of this woman lying in bed, and you see this cloud, this thought cloud, and it says, am I even good enough to have imposter syndrome? This this idea of like, I can't offer enough. I'm not good enough. I don't know enough yet. I haven't got enough experience. But so that's the sort of
Yeah.
personal level obstacles. But you've also pointed to external obstacles, like for example, there being a lack of support. And I think in our field in particular, maybe broadly speaking in education, but certainly in language education,
Yep.
many pre-service programs don't train for this at all. There's not that many in-service opportunities available, nowhere near as much as in many other fields. So yeah, what was some of the results that you got from your study with Caleb Powers regarding that?
Um, there was, it's interesting. We didn't have a specific question about mentoring. Sorry, that was in a follow-up study. So let me revise that comment. Um, so many people talked about the influence of a mentor,
Mm,
how somebody encouraged them or somebody helped them or somebody nominated them and explained why. That I think the role of encouragement is essential, right? But then there are also practical things. I mean, if you're talking about adding leadership responsibilities to your existing workload, time is always going to be a challenge, right? I think finances are going to be a challenge. Trying to establish that work-life balance, especially if you have children at home, young children, teenagers, or if you are, as so many people are these days, involved in elder care while you're
mm,
still a working adult, that trying to manage time for your leadership endeavors at the same time you're trying to maintain your career and have a life. It's that work-life balance issue that's so important and gets, I think, good attention these days, better than it has in
mm.
my lifetime, at least in terms of professional discussions. So I think time is an issue, finances are an issue, encouragement, and having people around you that will help you. I'll give you an example. Um, some years ago, I expressed an interest in taking on the chairmanship, the presidency of TURF. And for those of the viewing audience that aren't familiar with it, that's TURF, TIRF, is the International Research Foundation. Its full name is the International Research Foundation for English Language Education. And we were in a situation where our leadership was changing, and I volunteered to take on the president's role. But I knew there were things in that role that I'm not good at, fundraising being the classic example. So I asked for help. And I told the board when they were interviewing me that one of my strengths is that I'm a detail person, extremely detail oriented. And I get a lot of little things done, but I sometimes lose sight of the big picture.
Hmm.
And I would need their help. This is a board of about 16 at the time. I would need their help to keep the big picture in mind and remind myself that the details are moving us forward in the big picture. The details in and of themselves, they're important, but they're not enough. So I think asking for help, being ready to ask for help, being open to getting help is really crucial.
That's a leadership skill in and of itself, isn't it? I mean, as you say, like good leaders are not people who can do everything and who are excel
No,
at everything. I mean, quite the opposite sometimes. But they are people who can recognize not only their own weaknesses, but also the opportunities or the strength that other people bring, and put all of those people and resources together in such a way that 2 + 2 = 5.
yeah,
You can see my math is absolutely amazing. That's why I got into linguistics.
that's why you're a language teacher.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. One thing I wanted to pick up, and you mentioned this idea of not, time is a perennial issue. Teachers often mention it. I think two things I would say to that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. One is perhaps a little bit fuzzy, which is that you can manifest leadership in action in ways that align with the work that you're already doing. In other words, if you are smart about it, you can try and stack certain jobs, and you can ask yourself, well, if I have time for 10 things, which are the ones that contribute the most to what I stand for and what I want to achieve? Now, of course, that's an idealistic picture because there's always going to be constraints and time limits and deadlines, but still, regardless of that, you can. A lot of us, we get so busy that we forget to actually stop and think, like, what am I doing and what should I be doing and what would I like to be doing and how do I marry these together? And the other is this idea of recognition. And I think this is something that existing managers and leaders can do more on in terms of helping staff. Is if I see, let's say that I'm the head of the department, and I see that one of my colleagues actually went out of their way to help a new staff member and look after them, yeah, informally mentor them or just ask about the. If I recognize that during an annual staff, performance meeting, or if I, in some way just acknowledge that publicly or whatever, it becomes part of the job, and it's not just another thing on top of another thing that goes unnoticed and it just is added to the impossibly long list of things that we're expected to
Exactly.
do.
Yep.
Yeah. Leadership recognition. So if you are a manager, a leader listening, that's a really good starting point, isn't it? Yeah.
It is.
Good. So, heading towards the final part of our conversation, were there any other um, obstacles that were specifically mentioned by large numbers of teachers that they had experienced in their trajectories, in their experiences towards assuming leadership?
You know, I think I would go back to the phrase that you used about that cartoon, the imposter syndrome. So many brilliant leaders that I've known and fortunately been on a team with have often thought or thought at one point in their lives, I'm not the right person for this role. I'm not the right person to take on this responsibility. And I think one of the interesting developments in writing about leadership in our field, there are thousands of articles about leadership, especially out in business and industry. But a lot of them, in my experience, so I'm not widely read on this topic, a lot of them are about the characteristics of good leaders, and not so many about how did people become leaders? How do you develop those skills? How do you nurture those traits in yourself and in others? And along with your Ladder in the Clouds book, another one I love is Andy Curtis's book.
Mm.
I call this the Lotus book because it's got a lotus floating on a pond and reflected in the pond. It's reflecting on leadership and language education. And as you know, Ohio, but maybe some of the listeners don't, Andy asked 10 different experienced leaders in our field a series of questions, and each person responded to those questions. And they were about the struggles of leadership and then overcoming those struggles. And so it's like 10 case studies in this little book, very readable. And I think it's at least 4 or 5 of those people, of the 10, use the phrase imposter syndrome or refer to their total lack of confidence, that there's this natural, I don't want to say inevitable, but certainly widespread feeling among people as we get going with those initial leadership responsibilities or move into a new level of leadership with different and additional or more challenging responsibilities. It's natural, even if it's uncomfortable, to experience that imposter syndrome. To me, that's one of those, what did I say earlier? Attitude and stance. I think that's, let's see, if we believe ourselves, yeah, it would be part of our attitude. And I think that attitude about ourselves is part of what needs work in
Yep.
leadership development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And thinking the forward to our special issue for second language teacher education, the journal, we talked about willingness to lead, which is something you
Yeah.
can develop. It's a mixture of developing your confidence, willingness to take a bit of risk, willingness to deal with uncertainty, willingness to ask for help, like you said earlier. Yeah,
Yeah. It's a great phrase. I really like it. Willingness to lead. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it can be developed. It's not something you're necessarily born with.
Yeah, and that's what the case studies in Andy's book, for example, also show, and is that even people who have reached what you could call, the pinnacle of leadership in our field, report having had these doubts and these concerns and having had to work on overcoming them. And so, well, if those people have that, then I will have that too, and that's okay, right? Um,
Yeah.
so, well, I mean, I guess in conclusion, I think if people are listening to this, we don't know what we don't know. And so that means in this context that we don't know what we can do until we try. I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. And equally, if we don't try, then we'll never know what impact we could possibly have. And if
Mhm.
we don't try, and if other people think the same, then nobody's going to try. And then how do we move the field forward? How do we improve? How do we better support our learners and our colleagues and our community? So I hope that people listening from everything that you've said, Kathy, and that we've talked about will feel a little bit of a spark of inspiration to go out and, just try, learn.
Yeah,
And
I
yeah,
agree. I hope so too. I hope so
yeah.
too.
Well, we're going to put together some show notes. I'll do that in the next couple of days, and I'll put the links to the resources that we've mentioned, the books that you've shown, and our special issue. And Kathy, if you have any other articles, maybe your article with Caleb, that we can share if they're available publicly, we can put those as links in there as well, and hopefully people will enjoy reading those. Were there any last words of wisdom you wanted to share, or are you happy to start your weekend?
Just thank you for talking with me about these ideas. To me, they're so important. And I guess as teachers, we spend so much time working on the teachery stuff, improving our knowledge of the skill, improving our skills or improving our knowledge base, that It's not often that we take the time to sit back and just talk to one another about other important stuff. And so I thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you, everybody who's been watching and listening either now or later. And yeah, you're always welcome, certainly, to reach out to me. I'll put some contact details in the links, and also to the TURF organization. They have a tremendous number of amazing references and bibliographies and resources there. So definitely have a look at those. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and see you then.